Well, Saturday was, to be frank about it, an absolute disaster. My 5 takeaways after the Washington game certainly reflects how I felt about it. We're going to get into it. The thousand mea culpas, although to some of the things I don't necessarily feel sorry about. But we'll talk about all of it here on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Holt, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. I am back from Seattle. Didn't do a show. We were going to do a Saturday show. We were going to do a Monday show. Neither of those things worked out because I got sick while I was in Seattle. And now I have airplane ear, so I can't hear out of my right ear. So if I sound weird, that's why. Everything feels like I stuffed a sock inside of my ear. But we are back. Big shout out to all the people who said hello. Too many to name names. Say that you were loyal listeners and watchers of said podcast. So thank you very much for introducing yourselves or shouting out from the stands or any of those things. I appreciate every one of you. So let's talk about this absolute debacle of a game that happened in Seattle. Now, first and foremost, that is a setting. They I don't remember what they call it, like the greatest setting or something like that in college football. I know there obviously people love the Rose Bowl, and that is its own deal because it's kind of a magnitude meets setting. I mean, it's kind of hard to top what they have in Seattle. I mean, it was absolutely just a phenomenal. I mean, I walked away being like, because I think that I had said this on the show. I had no desire to even go to Seattle before going, and now it's, I think, my favorite place in the United States. It's absolutely gorgeous, and that stadium is gorgeous. The setting of the stadium is gorgeous. I mean, it was all just absolutely amazing. And if you're going to see Michigan lose a game, that's a pretty fun place to see it happen. Raucous crowd who was, I think they thought that by virtue of beating Michigan on Saturday, that they therefore are awarded the national championship trophy. It doesn't work that way. And I saw they made shirts for the game, which is about the saddest thing I've ever seen. It's almost as sad as I was trying to find the What a Game shirts. I don't know if any of you remember this from, I think it was 2012, Michigan State against Boise State. They beat Boise State in the season opener, and they made shirts, and it said, "What a game," and had the score. It was very similar. Same energy, really sad energy, ultimately. Singular regular season game shirts that aren't against your rival is just, it's something else. But and even then, even against your rival in season, like regular season, that's just, it's, I don't know, maybe it's just weird. But credit to Jed Fish and Company. I'm never going to speak ill of Jed. And had the luxury of getting to say hi to him before the game. But I'll never say anything ill of Jed. But this was a really good game plan by him. And obviously they have really good offensive players in some respect. I expect more from Michigan in a lot of different ways. I thought this was a failure in pretty much every single way. And credit to Michigan for fighting back and taking a late lead. Because at that time when they took the lead, I sat there and thought about it. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense that they're even leading right now. Because Washington has thoroughly outplayed them in basically all 3 phases of the game. Well, not all 3, 2 of the 3 phases. They obviously got, their special teams were abysmal. So 2 of the 3 phases. And it was an absolute debacle. I understood the move from quarterback only by the virtue of Jack Tuttle was the person who I said, if healthy, would be the starter at the outset of the season. But to me, making that move and I understand you're down 14-0, you don't seem to be able to move the ball, all of that kind of stuff. Jack comes in and gives you kind of a spark. He still only threw for like 98 yards. Obviously, the 2 turnovers were, it's like he gives, he takes away, right? Because he helps engineer the drives that get you the points that you needed, but he also turned the ball over, and Michigan lost by 10 points. Washington got 10 points off of turnovers. So you have that. But I thought it was a fairly desperate move, especially because, again, the complexion of the offense changes. The style of play changes. To me, I would have stuck with Orji, kind of like win or lose at that point, because you got to build something. Now, they're going to build with Tuttle, but this is like, all right, you've got nothing left. If this doesn't work, you're out of options except for going back to option A and option B. It's a desperation move. And I think that is just, it kind of shows you how rudderless this team is at the moment. On top of that, they're undisciplined. There were points late in the game, Donovan Edwards is trying to get everybody to rush back to the line of scrimmage to try to get another play. It was like a fruitless endeavor because his time was expiring and there was no way to be able to score a touchdown and then get the ball back and score another touchdown or field goal. But just to try to show, hey, we can do something, we can move the ball. And guys are just jogging up, and Donovan's jumping up and down, trying to screaming at everybody, come here, get back to the line of scrimmage, Just did not seem to be working out. Defensively, another game in which Wink Martindale got. And this is where I give you the biggest mea culpa, because I'm not going to apologize for my take on the quarterback situation. I still feel like I'm right there. To me, it was a mixture of the offense. I mean, the offense didn't necessarily go 3 and out in those early goings. The defense just was kind of a replay of the Texas game where the defense couldn't stop them. And the 2 players that really stuck out was Jair Hill, who had looked really good for the last 3 weeks, looked great against USC, and their cadre of elite wide receivers. I wouldn't say that Washington has elite wide receivers right now. They've got a really, really good quarterback, but not elite wide receivers. And yet he looked as bad as he did, maybe worse against Texas. And then the other guy, and here's where the big mea culpa comes, all the people who were complaining about Zeke Berry and I lambasted you last week. I don't think you were necessarily right in the games you were talking about, but man, he was atrocious in this game. Absolutely abysmal. Now, to some degree, it's like, okay, they allowed Washington to stall out enough. Bend don't break works to some degree, and you saw that to some degree, but just not enough pressure up front for having the elite guys you have. You weren't going up against the Texas offensive line. I understand Will Rogers was getting rid of the football relatively quickly a lot of the time. And when he wasn't, there was pressure. But it's just unbelievable to me that everything Michigan is doing right now isn't working. I would even go as far to say, I don't feel like this team has a discernible identity. What is it actually good at? We're going to continue along that train of thought here in just a moment. But before we do, all right, Locked On Wolverines fans, it's time for the Roy Player of the Week. The Roy app lets you directly support your favorite athletes, unlike collectives where you make a donation to a general fund. Roy lets you choose the specific athlete you want to support. You back the players you care about and in return get exclusive content after the season, like personal videos and updates. And the best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't create the content, you get your money back. This week I'm choosing Donovan Edwards. He obviously you could add 2 touchdowns, but he had the 1 long touchdown, kind of bouncing back, looking good. He averaged 6.8 yards per carry against Washington. Would have liked to have seen, we'll talk more about this later, but would have liked to have seen him more than they showcased him for. And I just contributed $100 to his campaign on Roy, and I want you to join me by making a payment as little as $10. When enough of us contribute, it's not just about the dollars, it's about the message we send. to the players of the Michigan football team together. Our collective support helps us keep them connected to our school. Plus, Roy is doing their part to bring fans closer to their schools and athletes with an exciting giveaway. Roy is giving one lucky fan 2 tickets to any game of their choice in November. You know which one you want to go to. Here's how to enter. Just download Roy in the App Store or Google Play. Use the code LOCKEDON when signing up and you're entered. Already on Roy will make a payment to any athlete's campaign and you'll also automatically be entered. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for official rules. Download Roy and try it out. There's no subscription, no recurring fees, and for as little as $10 you can get into the NIL game. Roy, support the players, change the game. I almost don't even know where to start with anything when it comes to this Michigan team right now. I would say I have not felt like the team was this rudderless since Brady Hoke. Now, I'm not going to necessarily blame Sharon Moore writ large here. I think he generally made the hires that it's kind of like, you know, the New York Jets just fired Robert Saleh, right? And he was the guy most people in Detroit wanted at that time. And it doesn't work out. And it, you know, you end up being happy because you got Dan Campbell and it did. I think Sharon Moore was the right hire. I think that the hires he made were probably the right hires. Kirk Campbell had not a great game. Wink Martindale obviously was absolutely abysmal. But that's the thing. If the offense is abysmal, the defense needs to be great. And that's kind of what we're accustomed to seeing from Michigan. And Michigan's ranked 48th in the country defensively at the moment, tied with Alabama. Alabama, who, you know, just lost to Vanderbilt. Ohio State's number 1. You look at some other teams. Michigan State's 43. Michigan State's doing a better job. Now, Michigan State hasn't played as many high-powered offenses, but they did play Oregon. It's nothing defensively is particularly great, except, I mean, I guess rushing defense is fine for the most part. Michigan's the 5th best rushing defense. So you can't run on Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. But there are a lot of times when they weren't out there in key moments. Like, that's the thing that kind of I don't understand is some of this rotational stuff. There was times, and actually one of them was a drive that ended up being fine for Michigan. I think they forced Washington into a 3-and-out. But it was like they're up 14-0. They've got the ball. And I look out there, and it's like Ike Iwunnah and Dominic Nichols. And it's like, okay, like you need like your best guys out there. Eventually, like on 3rd down, they brought in Kenneth and Mason, and I'm just looking at some of this rotation stuff, and I'm like, what's going on here? What are we doing? Offensively, kind of the same. I mentioned like Donovan Edwards. He shows early that he's the guy. Kalel Mullings can't get much going at all, and yet they say like we're gonna ride the hot hand. Well, Donovan Edwards is clearly your hot hand, and then they got equal amount of carries, 14-14, and there was just a lot of times where it's like I would just keep putting in Donovan because he's just averaging. I mean, he ended up averaging 6.8, but he ended up. It just seemed like every time he got the ball, he was getting 5 yards, and he broke one. And he could have broken another one if he didn't slip. So I just don't really understand kind of what they're doing as far as that's concerned. Michigan's pass defense, by the way, is not good. 115th in the country. This is starting to feel more 2020-ish because that's what Michigan in 2020, I don't know that it was necessarily good against the run, but it was 90th against the pass, and it felt like that was a team that absolutely got destroyed. So what are you doing here? You got Will Johnson, and he's playing fine. You know, I still think he made the big mistake late, where that could have gotten Michigan the ball back. I don't know why he was interfering, like why he went the way that he went with everything. But it felt like he's the type of guy that usually goes to try and make a play on the ball. I was sitting there saying there's going to come a point when they're going to test Will Johnson and he's going to make him pay. And then they finally test him and he does the opposite. It's bizarre. This team does not feel together in the way that you want them to be. Total offense, I mean, Michigan it's 118th in the country. 118th. Michigan State has bragging rights over Michigan right now. They're 99th in the country. Illinois, Michigan's next opponent, not great offensively, 100th in the country. Michigan's in Northwestern Purdue territory. Weirdly, Oklahoma, known to be offensive juggernaut, is 121. But so Michigan's not the worst in the Big Ten, but it is close. Passing offenses, I mean, it's going to be the worst in the country. I haven't even looked. Maybe not. It's 130. Ahead of only Air Force, Army, New Mexico State, Louisiana Monroe, and now Michigan. Michigan's pass offense is worse than Iowa, which is 3 spots ahead of it. And that's kind of the thing. Like, I kind of got this general feeling in the post-game press conference from a lot of my colleagues of kind of like, Michigan's got their quarterback. Like, nothing against Jack Tuttle, right? Like, I like all the guys in the room. Nothing is against any of these guys. I like Dave as far as people and some of their abilities. I like Davis Warren. I think you can see that he can spin the ball, but clearly in game time, he turns the ball over way too much. You just can't have it. There's some things that I think are encouraging, and if he could fix them, then yeah, he'd be great. Alex Orji, they're still working on the pass game. I thought we saw a lot of really nice steps against Minnesota, against Washington that just wasn't working in the few drives he was in. But I feel like he still needed more time personally, but he needs more time because he's not there yet. So it's not like I'm saying, oh, he's there, but to me, he gives you the highest ceiling. Jack Tuttle is certainly going to be the best general decision maker, I would think. He has the ability, former 4-star, can go through the reads, can have that scramble ability, can make the plays. But it's not like for the people that were kind of coming out of this, man, like Michigan's got their guy. It's like, okay, he had the same problems as Davis Warren. He turned the ball over twice. And he only threw for 98 yards and he played 3/4 of the game. This isn't like, okay, they finally got their guy. He came in and he was able to do all kinds of stuff and he just looked so great. Like some of the plays were really good. Hitting a Marion Walker, and this goes again back to my substitution thing. And, we're on the fly here. We're going to look up exactly how many snaps Amarian Walker had. Because it can't be that much, but it's like Amarian Walker finally, big play, gets a big catch, and immediately off the field. Like, he was so fired up, right? Like, you could see it was like, this is the moment he's been waiting for. He's the type of player Michigan needs. He played a total of 12 snaps. 3 of them were on punt coverage. That's it. 12. 9 in at wide receiver against Washington. Makes that big play. You only saw him again like one more time. It's an absolute disaster right now. Sorry, I am dying right now. All right, let's continue on as we very stuffed up and sickly talk about where things are and what Michigan needs to do here in the bye week. Let's do that here in just a moment. But before we do, hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. This airplane here is no joke, by the way. But, it's just, I've never experienced anything quite like this, where it just feels like this whole side of my face is just not. I can kind of hear out of this ear, but it's more, I can hear it through this ear. I don't know how to explain it. And for anyone who's going to say in the comments, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Yes, I've tried just about everything except for putting hydrogen peroxide down my ear, which is probably the next step here. Anyway, shout out to Ashley Vanderwall. He's not going to see this, but he's the guy who makes these hats. He he sent me a new hat after Alex Orji's thing. Check him out on Etsy, The Social Apologist. I know a lot of people always ask, where do I get my Jesus is King hats? That is where, Etsy, The Social Apologist. So shout out to him. Again, shout out to Seattle for being great hosts, except for in the post game. Some of the things I saw some of the students doing when they rushed the field it reminded me of Michigan State in 2015. Some of them were asking to get leveled out by Michigan players, like running right up to them and screaming at them. Some of this isn't my firsthand. Some of it is just after comparing notes with some people. Some of them calling them cheaters, slipping them off, stuff like that. Act like you've been there. You're Washington, like you're nothing to scoff at. And you were favored to win the game. So that was a little disappointing to see, was just that behavior. I'm sure that happens even when Michigan fans rush the field against Ohio State, that you're going to have some bad actors. I saw some guys that were just acting crazy. When you rush the field and the players are still out there, you're the opposing team. You're asking for a bad time. I know there's a video of Chris Bryant circulating. We don't know the context of which that happened. I would still suggest to him, hey, keep your cool. Don't go over to the fans. But regardless, it is what it is. Where does Michigan go from here? Jack Tuttle named to be the third starter for this team. I still would have liked to have seen the Alex Orji experiment continue on. Pretty clear on that. It has a trajectory that was starting to work. Even if they lost this last game, I think that it would have been just part of the trajectory. And now I think it's just over. He's just going to have to deal with it. I think Jack Tuttle can win you a lot of games. I absolutely do. One of the biggest problems, though, is they don't have receivers. Michigan doesn't have receivers. Even though I think the offensive line did not play bad this week. That's maybe the one saving grace, I think, is the offensive line. It had its moments, but for the most part, I thought this was one of their better games in terms of pass protection. And I think that they did a pretty good job as far as that was concerned. But everything else kind of not working. Wide receivers are just not stepping up. And this is where kind of the play calling comes in. You don't have the wide receivers, and you're unwilling to put in an Amarian Walker who at least was able to make a big play. He's able to make one, keep on trying to do those things. I feel like that is where I'm banging my head against the wall. When they do things that work, keep doing them. You used to see, like, I think this is like where Michigan, maybe in large part because it's divided its offense between this Tuttle Warren side, which is like JJ Light, essentially, or maybe it's more Cade McNamara in those terms. But I feel like they're expecting a little bit more JJ type play. I don't think it's simplified as much as like that is. I think you have that, and then you have the full-on Jalen Milroe dual threat Alex Orji offense. And I feel like they've become dilettantes, where it's like they're okay with everything, but not great at anything. Masters of none is where they're at. And because they're masters of none, they can't really go out there and say, well, we're just going to keep doing X to you, and you can't do anything about it. Right? Like you've seen, like, Urban Meyer's Ohio State teams would just run the same play over and over again and be like, we're just going to run it until you stop it. I'm talking like earlier on, you're looking at like the Curtis Samuel or the, who was the guy before him in that same role? Can't remember offhand, but, kind of the Percy Harvin, Arc Reed type play, they were really good at just like, we're just going to keep doing this and you're not going to be able to stop it. So it is what it is. Michigan has no bread and butter. There's nothing that you can look at and say like this, if they need to go to the well, they're going to be able to do this. Defensively, man, I just do not have any answers for how they're going to get better, because Wink Martindale has got. And as much as he can sit there and rest on his resume, and say, be like, I'm one of the best defensive coordinators that was in the pros. You're going to hear every post-game guy talk about how good Wink Martindale is. win or lose or whatever, all the preparation, that's great. But when it comes down to it, he's failing and the stats show it. You can sit there and say, well, if we did this and we did that. You are who you are. And the stats and the scores tell you who you are. And even though you can sit there and say, well, the defense played well enough for the most part. They allowed 27 points. And if it wasn't for 2 short fields, then maybe it's more like 17. Okay, fine. But the problem is you're getting got in ways that you shouldn't be getting got. And I know they're not giving up like 50 points a game or anything like that. They're ranked 48th in terms of total yards. You don't expect Michigan to be there in terms of scoring defense. I'm sure it's still one of the top units in the country to some degree. We're going to look right now. 56th, actually worse, 22.3 points per game. Contrast that with last year, 10.4. Contrast that with the year before, 16.1. Contrast that with the year before, 17.4. It's 5 more points a game. And considering what the offense is incapable of doing at the moment, 17 points a game, an extra 7 points per game or whatever, is absolutely detrimental. Because this offense has shown no proclivity to being able to do much of anything when it needs to. And if they don't figure things out in a hurry, they're going to lose at Illinois. Now, I think that they very well could win that game. Everything I said before stands. They could go and beat Oregon, and then they could lose to Indiana. Now, Indiana's a pretty good team right now. But nothing would surprise. It wouldn't surprise me if they lost to Northwestern and beat Ohio State. That's just kind of what this team is. You have no idea what they are because they have no identity. And that's the problem. All right, we're going to be back. We're talking to players tonight, so we'll be back tomorrow. The plan is to have Connor Stallions on this week. He asked me about going on Bussin' with the Boys. He went on that, and he said, okay, if I'm going to do Bussin' with the Boys, then we'll do Locked On Wolverines. So we'll have him sometime this week if everything holds. And we'll have a mailbag this week. We'll continue to just kind of ruminate on the terribleness of whatever this team is at the moment. Because 4-2, but man, it does not feel 4-2. And this was the inflection game. This was the game that you win it and you're like, okay, maybe we're cooking with gas here. Maybe it doesn't matter that this team doesn't have much of an identity. They can just kind of figure it out. But it's kind of funny. I watch Michigan State and I'm like, that team doesn't really have an identity. And it's just kind of like going into every game, like hoping you win. Teams with a strong identity of here's what we're going to do to beat you every week. Those are the teams that win. That's what Michigan was the last couple of years. Right now, they're not that. All right, we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Peace.